The emergency beacon screamed through space, its desperate signal reaching every civilized world within 100 light-years. The luxury cruise ship, Serenity's Dream, was dying. Her hull cracked open like an egg, atmosphere bleeding into the void. 3,000 passengers from 12 different species floated in the wreckage, their life support systems failing one by one. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zolonian Empire stood in the emergency council chambers aboard the nearest space station, his 4 arms gesturing frantically at the holographic display. The massive alien's usually calm demeanor had cracked like the doomed ship itself. "The situation is hopeless," he declared, his translator converting his chittering speech into standard galactic. "The Serenity's Dream is trapped in the gravity well of a collapsing gas giant. The tidal forces are tearing her apart. No ship can get close enough for a rescue without being destroyed." Around the circular chamber, representatives from various species nodded in grim agreement. The Throkal delegate, a crystal-based being that communicated through light patterns, flashed somber colors. The aquatic Merhai ambassador made clicking sounds of distress through her water-filled breathing apparatus. "What about evacuation pods?" asked Commander Zish of the Confederation Navy, his reptilian features showing the strain of the situation. "All destroyed in the initial collision with the asteroid field," Kethvar replied. "The ship's captain managed to send one final transmission before communications went dark. They estimate maybe 6 hours before complete hull breach." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. 6 hours to save 3,000 souls, and no one had a solution. That's when the human walked in. Captain Sarah Chen looked unremarkable compared to the assembled aliens. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, with brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and wearing a plain blue uniform of the Terran Space Fleet. No extra arms, no exotic skin, no unusual features except for her eyes. Those strange human eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and something else, something the other species had never quite understood. "Apologies for the delay," she said, taking the only empty seat. "I came as soon as I received the emergency broadcast." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been annoyance. "Captain Chen, while we appreciate Earth's offer of assistance, I'm afraid this situation is beyond any current technology. The gravitational shears would destroy any rescue vessel." Sarah pulled out a small tablet and studied the data streaming across its surface. Her fingers moved quickly, accessing ship manifests, environmental readings, and trajectory calculations. The other delegates watched with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Humans were known for their optimism, but this seemed hopeless even by their standards. "The Serenity's Dream is a Vorthan heavy cruiser, correct?" Sarah asked without looking up. "Yes, but I don't see how that matters," Commander Shish replied. "Her hull plating is already failing under the stress." "Actually, it matters quite a bit." Sarah stood and moved to the holographic display, manipulating the controls with practiced ease. The image zoomed in on the crippled ship. Vorthan cruisers have redundant structural support beams made from crystallized duranium. Very strong, but they conduct gravitational forces differently than standard hull materials. The assembled aliens leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. "If we could somehow use those support beams as a framework," Sarah continued, "we might be able to stabilize the ship long enough for evacuation." "Impossible," Kethvar stated flatly. "The mathematics don't work. Any ship attempting to dock would be crushed instantly." Sarah smiled, and several delegates unconsciously shifted in their seats. There was something unsettling about human smiles, something that suggested they were thinking thoughts that no sane being would contemplate. "Who said anything about docking?" she asked. Before anyone could respond, Sarah's communicator chirped. She answered it with a quick gesture. "Chen here." "Captain, this is Commander Martinez aboard the Indomitable. We've received your preliminary orders and are standing by. The crew is ready for immediate departure. Understood, Commander. How's our experimental cargo? The quantum tether array is functioning within normal parameters. Engineering says they've never tested it under these conditions, but the theory is sound. Theory will have to be enough. Prepare for emergency deployment. We launch in 30 minutes. Sarah ended the communication and turned back to the stunned delegates. You're actually planning to attempt a rescue, Kethvar said. It wasn't a question. Of course. But the risks are significant, Sarah agreed, but not insurmountable. The Indomitable is equipped with experimental quantum tether technology. We can't dock with the Serenity's Dream, but we don't need to. We can establish a stable energy bridge between the ships. Commander Shish's scales rippled with confusion. Even if such a bridge were possible, how would you evacuate 3,000 beings across empty space? Very carefully, Sarah replied, and very quickly. The Mayor High Ambassador bubbled something that the translator rendered as highly skeptical. Captain Chen, what you propose has never been attempted. The quantum tether technology is theoretical at best. You would be risking your ship and crew on an unproven concept. Yes, Sarah said simply. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, all trying to convince the human of the folly of her plan. But Sarah had already moved on, accessing the station's communication array. This is Captain Chen broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Any vessels in the Kepler 442 system capable of emergency response, please respond. We have a rescue operation beginning in T-minus 28 minutes. Responses came immediately. A Throkel mining vessel reported ready to assist. 2 Confederation patrol ships confirmed their availability. Even a Zolonian merchant convoy offered their cargo bays for refugee housing. Kethvar watched in amazement as Sarah coordinated the impromptu rescue fleet. Other species planned for months before attempting operations half as complex. Humans just did things. Captain, he said during a brief lull in communications, I must ask, why? Why risk so much for strangers? Sarah paused in her preparations and looked at him with those unsettling eyes. Because they need help. But the odds of success don't matter. Her voice was steady, certain. There are 3,000 people dying in that wreck. We have the capability to save them. That's all the calculation I need. The Zolonian ambassador felt something cold crawl down his spine. He had dealt with humans for nearly 2 decades, had studied their psychology and sociology, had thought he understood them. But in this moment, looking at Captain Chen's calm determination to attempt the impossible, he realized he had understood nothing at all. The Indomitable is launching now, Sarah announced to the chamber. Estimated time to intercept is 4 hours, 20 minutes. We'll have approximately 90 minutes to complete the evacuation before the Serenity's Dream's hull gives way entirely. What do you need from us? Commander Shish asked, his military instincts overriding his skepticism. Prayer wouldn't hurt, Sarah replied with that unsettling smile, but mostly just keep the refugee ships positioned at safe distance. When we start sending people across, we'll need immediate medical support and processing. She headed toward the exit, then paused at the door. Oh, and Commander Shish, you might want to record this. When it works, a lot of people are going to want to know how we did it. After she left, the chamber remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Kethvar spoke. She said, when it works, not if it works. The Throkel delegate flashed a pattern that the translator rendered as, humans don't seem to understand the concept of impossible. No, agreed the Merhai ambassador, they don't. In the depths of space, the Indomitable streaked toward almost certain destruction, carrying a crew of humans who had volunteered for a mission that violated every principle of safe space travel. Behind them, representatives of a dozen species watched and waited, trying to comprehend the alien logic that drove these strange beings to risk everything for strangers. The rescue hadn't even begun, and already the humans were showing exactly who they were. 4 hours later, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as her ship approached the dying cruise liner. The gas giant dominated the view screen, its swirling clouds already beginning to collapse inward as its core destabilized. The Serenity's Dream tumbled helplessly in the gravity well, her hull groaning under forces that would have crushed lesser vessels. "Gravitational stress is approaching critical levels," reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the science station. "Hull integrity is at 37% and falling. Distance to target? 200,000 kilometers and closing." Sarah nodded, her hands gripping the command chair arms. Around her, the bridge crew worked with focused intensity. No one spoke of the danger. No one mentioned the odds. They had a job to do. "Commander Martinez, report on the quantum tether array." "All systems green, Captain. We've never tested it under these gravitational conditions, but the field generators are holding steady." "Life signs aboard the target vessel?" "Confirmed. 3,047 souls still alive, but their life support is failing fast." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of those lives pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her resolve was absolute. "All stop! Begin quantum tether deployment!" The Indomitable shuddered as massive energy projectors extended from her hull. The quantum tether technology was humanity's newest breakthrough, a way to create stable energy bridges across impossible distances. In theory, it could work. In practice, it had never been tested under conditions like these. "Tether field establishing," Park announced. "Energy bridge forming. We have connection." On the view screen, a shimmering tunnel of energy stretched between the two ships, holding steady despite the chaotic gravitational forces trying to tear it apart. "Incredible," whispered someone on the bridge. But Sarah was already moving to the next phase. "Launch emergency personnel. Begin evacuation procedures immediately." The real work was just beginning. The energy bridge held, crackling with power as it stretched across the void between the two ships. But establishing the connection was only the beginning. Now came the impossible part: moving 3,000 terrified beings across a tunnel of pure energy while both ships were being torn apart by gravitational forces. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez secured her helmet and checked her equipment one final time. As the leader of the Indomitable's emergency response team, she would be the first across the quantum bridge. Around her, 23 other humans prepared for what should have been a suicide mission. "Remember," she addressed her team over the comm, "the gravity differential between ships means up and down won't make sense once we cross. The Zolonians panic in 0G. The Merhai need constant water circulation, and the Throkal become disoriented without solid surfaces. We're dealing with a dozen species, each with different survival requirements." Corman Jenkins raised his hand. "Sarge, what about the radiation exposure from the gas giant?" "According to the readings, we'll absorb about 6 months' worth of normal background radiation for every hour we're exposed. Medical says we'll be fine as long as we don't exceed 4 hours total exposure time." She didn't mention that 4 hours wouldn't be nearly enough to evacuate everyone. They all knew the math. "Questions?" she asked. When no one responded, she nodded. "Then let's go save some lives." The quantum bridge felt like walking through liquid lightning. Every step sent electric tingles up Rodriguez's spine, and her suit's radiation detectors chirped constantly. But the bridge held firm, the energy field maintaining integrity, despite the chaos around them. Emerging into the Serenity's Dream was like stepping into hell. The ship's artificial gravity had failed completely, leaving 3,000 beings floating in terror throughout the vessel. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. Worst of all was the sound, the constant groaning of metal under stress, punctuated by occasional sharp cracks as another structural support gave way. "Medical team to Deck 7, Rodriguez called over the comm. Throkal passengers are going into crystalline shock without gravity orientation. Engineering team to Deck 12. I need you to stabilize the Merhai habitat pods before they lose water pressure. Her people spread out with practiced efficiency. This was what humans did best: adapt to chaos, think on their feet, solve problems that had no textbook solutions. Rodriguez made her way to the ship's bridge, where she found Captain Veltar, a tall, insect-like Vorthan, clutching a damaged control console with all four of his primary arms. "Captain Chen sent me," Rodriguez announced. "We're here to get your people out." Veltar's compound eyes fixed on her with something like hope. "The quantum bridge? It's actually stable?" "Stable enough. But we need to move fast. How are your passengers organized?" "They're not," Veltar admitted. "When the gravity failed, everything became chaos. The different species separated by instinct, Zolonians to the upper decks, Merhai toward the water treatment centers, Throkal to the cargo bays where there are solid surfaces." Rodriguez nodded, already formulating a plan. "We'll evacuate by species groups. Start with the ones most likely to panic in transport. Get me internal communications." What followed was organized chaos on a massive scale. Human rescue teams moved through the dying ship like antibodies fighting an infection. They rigged emergency lights, stabilized failing life support systems, and began the delicate process of moving thousands of alien beings across a bridge made of pure energy. The first group consisted of 50 Zolonian children, their natural adaptability to zero gravity making them the easiest to transport. Specialist Martinez, who had studied Zolonian psychology, sang traditional Earth lullabies as she guided them through the quantum tunnel. The children, fascinated by the humans' strange vocal music, followed calmly across the bridge, but not everything went smoothly. "Rodriguez, we have a problem on Deck 9, Corpsman Barnes reported over the comm. "The Throkal delegates are refusing to leave their quarters. They're convinced the quantum bridge will disintegrate them at the molecular level." Rodriguez pushed off a bulkhead and sailed through the ship's corridors, her magnetic boots clanking against metal surfaces. She found the Throkal delegation, 5 crystal-based beings whose bodies refracted the emergency lighting into dancing rainbows, barricaded in their luxury suite. "We will not submit to human experimental technology," declared their leader, a being whose name translated roughly to bright cutting sharp light. "We prefer to die with dignity aboard this vessel." Rodriguez had dealt with Throkal before. They were logical to a fault, but their logic often led them to conclusions that seemed insane to other species. "I understand your concerns," she said, keeping her voice calm. "But I have a proposal. What if I go first? You can observe the quantum bridge's effect on human biology before making your decision." The Throkal leader's crystalline structure shifted, casting new light patterns. "You would risk molecular dissolution to demonstrate the bridge's safety." "I would." What Rodriguez didn't mention was that she had already crossed the bridge 6 times in the past hour, ferrying injured passengers to safety. But the Throkal didn't know that. She positioned herself at the entrance to the quantum tunnel and stepped through. The familiar tingle of energy washed over her as she emerged on the Indomitable, then immediately turned around and came back. To the watching Throkal, it looked like a fearless demonstration of the bridge's safety. "As you can see," Rodriguez said, "I am still molecularly intact." The Throkal delegates exchanged rapid light-pattern communications before their leader spoke again. "Your willingness to demonstrate personal risk for our safety is unexpected. We will cross." Meanwhile, other human teams were dealing with different challenges. On Deck 12, the Merhai habitat pods were failing. These aquatic beings needed constant water circulation to breathe, and their mobile tanks were running out of power. Chief Petty Officer Washington, a former deep-sea diver, jury-rigged a water circulation system using ship's plumbing and portable pumps. I need you to hold your breath for about 30 seconds while we transfer you to the emergency tanks, he explained to a group of terrified Merhai children through the waterproof translator. But we cannot hold our breath, one of them replied. We are not air breathers like you. Washington smiled. Trust me, I spent 2 years working underwater back on Earth. I know how to move water breathers safely. He had rigged up a continuous water stream using fire hoses and portable pumps, creating a flowing tunnel of water that paralleled the quantum bridge. It was insane, improvised, and completely against every safety protocol ever written. It worked perfectly. The most challenging evacuation came on Deck 4, where a group of Yithran diplomats had become trapped when a ceiling collapsed. The Yithrans were large, silicon-based beings who weighed nearly a ton each. Worse, they were injured and couldn't move under their own power. Sergeant Kim looked at the situation and did what humans always did when faced with impossible physics. She ignored them. We need a lever, she announced to her team. A what? Asked Private Johnson. A lever, something long and strong. Help me strip these support beams. What Kim had in mind violated every principle of safe rescue operations. She planned to use debris from the collapsed ceiling as a makeshift lever, using the ship's emergency airlock as a fulcrum. By creating a seesaw effect, they could launch the injured Yithrans across the gap to where other team members could catch them and guide them to the quantum bridge. Sarge, Johnson said nervously, the math on this doesn't work. We'll never generate enough force. Then we'll make it work, Kim replied, already welding pieces of debris together with her emergency torch. Calculate the angle we need and stop worrying about what's supposed to be impossible. 20 minutes later, they were literally launching ton-heavy aliens through zero gravity using a contraption that looked like it had been designed by a child with building blocks. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it was poetry. Each Yithran diplomat sailed gracefully through the air, guided by subtle touches from human rescuers who seemed to instinctively understand three-dimensional physics in ways that baffled other species. The humans moved through zero gravity like dancers, anticipating momentum and trajectory with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. By the third hour, they had evacuated over 2,000 passengers, but time was running out. Rodriguez, this is Captain Chen. The Serenity's Dream's hull integrity is down to 12%. You need to start wrapping up the operation. Rodriguez looked around at the remaining passengers, nearly 800 beings of various species, including many injured and elderly. In the distance, she could hear the ship's structure groaning under increasing stress. Captain, we need at least another hour to get everyone out safely. You don't have an hour. The gas giant's collapse is accelerating. If you're not off that ship in the next 40 minutes, the quantum bridge will collapse and we'll lose everyone. Rodriguez closed her eyes briefly, then opened her communicator to all teams. Listen up, people. We're going to emergency evacuation protocols, double up on passenger loads, skip safety checks, and move like hell itself is chasing us. That's against every regulation in the book, Barnes pointed out. The book didn't account for this situation, Rodriguez replied. We're writing new rules as we go. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. The human rescue teams abandoned every safety protocol and started moving passengers at speeds that should have been impossible. They carried multiple beings at once, created human chains through the quantum bridge, and organized bucket brigade-style evacuations that moved dozens of people simultaneously. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also the most magnificently human thing any of the alien passengers had ever witnessed. As the clock ticked down to the final minutes, Rodriguez found herself alone with the ship's captain, Veltar, who had refused to leave his bridge. I cannot abandon my vessel, the Vorthon stated formally. It is against everything I believe. Your ship is already dead, Rodriguez replied gently. "But you don't have to die with it. My duty is to your passengers, not to a pile of metal." Rodriguez's voice carried absolute certainty. "You've done your duty, Captain. You kept them alive long enough for us to save them. Now let us save you, too." Veltar looked around his destroyed bridge one final time, then nodded. "Very well." They were the last two beings to cross the quantum bridge. As they stepped through the energy tunnel, the Serenity's dream finally succumbed to the gravitational stresses, tearing her apart. Behind them, the ship cracked completely in half, her pieces tumbling into the hungry gravity well of the collapsing gas giant. But ahead of them, aboard the Indomitable and the fleet of rescue ships that had gathered, 3,047 beings breathed and lived and marveled at the humans who had made the impossible routine. The evacuation was complete. But the real revelation was just beginning. 3 days after the rescue, Ambassador Kethvar stood in the observation lounge of the emergency station, watching the human ship Indomitable prepare for departure. The vessel showed clear signs of stress from the mission: hull scoring from radiation exposure, emergency welds where microfractures had been repaired, and the distinctive energy residue that marked a ship that had pushed far beyond safe operational limits. Beside him stood Captain Veltar, the Vorthon whose ship had been destroyed. The insect-like being had been silent for most of the past 3 days, processing what he had witnessed. "They should all be dead," Veltar said quietly. "By every calculation, every safety protocol, every principle of space rescue, they should have died attempting that mission." "But they didn't," Kethvar replied. "No, they didn't." Throughout the station, similar conversations were taking place among the rescued passengers. 3,000 beings from 12 species, all trying to make sense of what the humans had done. In the medical bay, Dr. Shalani treated the last of the injured passengers. The Mayor High Physician had worked alongside human medics for the past 3 days and found herself constantly amazed by their approach to healing. "Your medical techniques are unconventional," she remarked to Dr. Patricia Hawkins, who was checking on a young Throkal whose crystalline structure had been damaged during the evacuation. "In what way?" Dr. Hawkins asked, adjusting the harmonic resonator that was helping the crystal child's body repair itself. "You improvise constantly. When the Yithran diplomat developed complications from his injuries, you created an entirely new treatment protocol using equipment designed for completely different purposes." Dr. Hawkins smiled. "We had to. There isn't exactly a handbook for treating silicon-based life forms with equipment designed for carbon-based biology." "But that's exactly my point," Dr. Shalani said, her gills fluttering with excitement. "Other species would have concluded that treatment was impossible without proper equipment. You simply made it possible." Down in the engineering sections, Chief Engineer Torkesh of the Confederation Navy was reviewing technical reports with Commander Martinez from the Indomitable. The massive, rocky-skinned engineer kept shaking his head in disbelief. "The stress readings on your quantum tether array exceeded maximum parameters by 300%, Torkesh rumbled. "The system should have failed catastrophically." "It nearly did," Martinez admitted. "We had to reroute power from life support, weapons, and even artificial gravity to keep the field stable. You risked your entire ship's operational capacity for an unproven technology. We risked our ship to save lives. The technology was just a tool." Torkesh was quiet for a moment. In his long career, he had seen many species approach engineering problems, but none quite like the humans. "Your people treat every problem as if it has a solution waiting to be found." "Doesn't it?" Martinez asked, genuinely puzzled. "I mean, maybe not the first solution you try, or the second, or even the 10th, but there's always something that works if you keep trying." That evening, Ambassador Kethvar called a formal assembly in the station's main conference hall. All the rescued passengers who were able to attend gathered to hear what their governments had decided about the rescue. The Galactic Council has reviewed the events of 3 days ago, Kethvar announced formally. The successful evacuation of the Serenity's Dream has been officially classified as statistically impossible using known technology and approved methods. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several beings looked confused. However, Kethvar continued, the Council has also voted unanimously to recommend that all member species study human emergency response techniques for possible adoption into their own protocols. Captain Sarah Chen, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the hall, stood up. With respect, Ambassador, you're missing the point. All eyes turned to the small human woman who had orchestrated the impossible rescue. She moved to the front of the room with that distinctive human confidence that seemed to assume solutions existed even when logic said they didn't. The techniques we used weren't particularly advanced, Sarah explained. The quantum tether is new technology, yes, but everything else was improvisation, adaptation, and a willingness to try things that might not work. But that's precisely what makes them remarkable, interjected Dr. Shalani. No other species would have attempted what you did. Sarah looked around the room at the sea of alien faces, beings saved from certain death by humans who had refused to accept the impossible. Maybe that's because you're thinking about it wrong, she said gently. You see the rescue as a miracle because it shouldn't have worked. But we didn't see it as a miracle, we saw it as a problem that needed solving. She gestured toward the rescued passengers. 3,000 people were going to die unless someone did something. So we did something. When the first plan didn't work perfectly, we modified it. When standard procedures weren't adequate, we created new ones. When the equipment wasn't designed for the situation, we made it work anyway. Young Throkal delegate Bright Cutting Sharp Light flashed a pattern of confusion. But the risk of failure was enormous. The logical response would have been to accept the limitations and minimize losses. To accept that people would die when we had the ability to save them? Sarah shook her head. That's not logical. That's just giving up. Commander Zish leaned forward in his seat. Captain Chen, what you describe sounds less like a rescue operation and more like controlled chaos. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But chaos isn't always bad. Sometimes chaos is just another word for possibility. An elderly Yithran diplomat, one of those who had been launched through zero gravity by Sergeant Kim's improvised catapult, spoke up in his deep, rumbling voice. In all my centuries of life, I have never seen anything like what your people did. You treated physical laws as suggestions rather than absolute limits. Physical laws are absolute, Sarah corrected. But they're also tools. You can use them, work around them, combine them in unexpected ways. The trick is understanding that the laws describe what is, not what's possible. Ambassador Kethvar had remained silent during this exchange, but now he stood and addressed the room. I have studied human behavior for 2 decades. I thought I understood your species' psychology, your motivations, your capabilities. But watching this rescue operation, I realized I understood nothing. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. Other species develop technology and tactics to reduce risk, to guarantee success before attempting difficult operations. You develop them to enable attempts at impossible operations. Because impossible just means no one has figured out how to do it yet, Sarah replied simply. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. It wasn't just about the rescue. It was about a fundamental difference in how humans approached reality itself. Dr. Shalani spoke into the silence. You see the universe as incomplete rather than fixed. We see it as interesting, Sarah corrected. Full of problems waiting for solutions, challenges waiting for attempts, possibilities waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to try making them real. Over the following hours, individual passengers approached the human crew members with questions, observations, and expressions of gratitude. But what emerged was something deeper than simple thankfulness. A group of young Zolonian engineers cornered Lieutenant Commander Park, pelting him with questions about improvised problem-solving techniques. Throkal philosophers engaged Dr. Hawkins in lengthy discussions about the ethics of risk-taking when other lives hung in the balance. Murhai artists wanted to understand how humans could remain creatively adaptive under extreme stress. But perhaps the most telling conversation happened between Sergeant Rodriguez and a Vorthon child named Klixtha, whose parents had been among the injured. "Why did you come back for us?" the child asked through his translator. "Your ship was safe. You could have stayed away." Rodriguez knelt down to the child's level, her expression serious. "Because you needed help. But you didn't know us. We're not your people." Rodriguez smiled. And in that smile was something that transcended species boundaries, a warmth that spoke of kinship beyond biology. "Kid, when someone needs help, they are our people." Word of the conversation spread throughout the station within hours. It captured something essential about the humans that the aliens had witnessed but couldn't quite articulate. The humans hadn't risked everything for strategic advantage, or political gain, or even moral obligation. They had done it because the alternative, allowing preventable suffering, was simply unacceptable to them. As the Indomitable prepared to depart, Captain Veltar requested a private meeting with Captain Chen. They met in the station's diplomatic quarters, two ship captains sharing a moment outside the glare of official attention. "I have commanded vessels for 40 years, Veltar said. "I pride myself on following proper procedures, maintaining safety margins, protecting my crew through careful planning and risk assessment." "Those are good qualities in a captain," Sarah replied diplomatically. "They are safe qualities," Veltar corrected. "But watching your people work, I realize that safety can become its own prison. You break rules not because you're reckless, but because you're free." Sarah considered this. "I'm not sure it's about freedom. Maybe it's about responsibility. When you see a problem you can solve, don't you feel responsible for solving it? Even when solving it might kill you? Especially then, because if we don't try, who will?" Veltar's compound eyes reflected the station lights as he processed this. "Your species frightens the rest of us, you know." "I know. But perhaps being frightening isn't always a bad thing. Perhaps the galaxy needs beings who are willing to attempt the impossible." 3 hours later, the Indomitable departed for Earth, carrying a crew of humans who thought they had simply done their jobs. Behind them, they left 3,000 living beings who would carry the memory of human courage to 12 different worlds. But they also left something more significant, a new understanding among the galactic community about what was possible when limitation was treated as invitation rather than barrier. In the weeks that followed, rescue training programs throughout known space began incorporating human-style emergency protocols. Starfleet academies added courses on improvised problem-solving. Medical schools started teaching adaptive treatment methodology. The changes weren't just technical, they were philosophical. The humans had demonstrated that impossible was often just another word for untried. They had shown that caring enough about the outcome could make you willing to attempt solutions that rationality would reject. Most importantly, they had proven that sometimes the greatest successes came not from following established procedures, but from having the courage to write new ones in the moment when lives hung in the balance. Ambassador Kethvar would later write in his official report, "The human rescue of the Serenity's dream represents more than a successful emergency operation. It represents a fundamental challenge to accepted limitations on what caring beings will attempt for each other." They showed us that the question is not whether something can be done, but whether it should be done. And if the answer is yes, then how becomes merely a technical problem awaiting a solution. The rescue at Kepler 442 became legendary throughout the galaxy, studied in academies and retold in a dozen languages. But for the humans involved, it remained simply what they had done when people needed help. After all, when someone needs help, they are your people, and humans never abandon their people.